Welcome back to Civil Defense Engineering, where we're engineering solutions for the average citizen to become more resilient and more prepared for any disasters or conflicts coming in the future. So today we're starting a brand new series on comms and signals for small units. We'll be drawing a lot of inspiration from the U.S. Army Field Handbook, how they do things, but we'll be tailoring it specifically for what's useful for citizen militias. And so today's video is going to be starting off with what gear do you need, and we'll be going over some basic radio procedures and concepts of COMSEC and TRANSEC. So let's get into it. So let's get into it. You don't need much in terms of equipment. Most people just start out with a Baofeng UV5R like this one here. And yes, it's a cheap $35 radio. Yes, you could break if you drop it or submerge it in water or something like that. But I think it's better to get many of these than invest in one $400 radio. If you can, sure, definitely get a nicer radio from a reputable brand like Yaesu, ICOM, Anytone, Motorola, any of those big names. It will take you very far, but don't feel like you have to, because the Baofeng is just fine. It gets the job done. And I want to say that the radio itself isn't even as important as the antenna. If you have just the rubber duck antenna that it comes with, it's fine, but I noticed that I wasn't able to connect with someone simplex on the rubber duck antenna. I went out and got this whip antenna, which has better performance, and was able to make that contact. So the antenna is probably more important than the radio itself. Don't feel embarrassed if all you have is a Baofeng. You can do a lot with it. I mean, there's a whole book we're going to talk about. The knowledge of how to do radio procedures is going to be more important for you, because if you use a Baofeng like a normie, yeah, that might be bad because you're compromising COMSEC, TRANSEC, all those things we're going to get into in this video. But if you understand those concepts, it almost doesn't matter what radio you have. You will be able to be deadly with it. Other things you need, well, if you're part of a fire team, obviously you need some headset, which is also hearing protection. So get one with a 3.5 millimeter jack, auxiliary port there. And that's used in conjunction with a push to talk, like this shoulder mic I have. By the way, I was saying Baofengs are just fine. Yeah, their radios are fine. I have found their accessories are terrible. This is the third shoulder mic I got before it finally worked. The first two never worked out of the box for different reasons too. So there's that. Have yourself some Write in the Rain for note taking, both writing down messages you receive and composing messages and standard reports that you are going to transmit. And we're going to talk about why that's important in a second. But yeah, get a Write in the Rain, and then a weatherproof pen or a pencil, totally fine. What else? Oh, and signals operating instructions, any specific call signs, frequencies that you're using, so that you're able to not rely on your faulty memory. I also wanted to mention Meshtastic radios, like this one, this Rock Wireless. And then I also recently got this very small Seed sense cap tracker. You see it's about the size of a credit card, only a little thicker. These are, I believe, these types of radios are the future of comms for prepared citizens, because they're text-based, connects to your phone. Who communicates via calling anymore? They're low power. They're going to be harder to detect on a waterfall, SIGINT type of thing. There are extra precautions you might have to take to make sure COMSEC is adhered to, but you don't need a license. I just think there's a lot of benefits. And the more people who have them, the stronger your network becomes. It's like building out your own cell network, because each radio acts as a cell tower, basically its own node, its own repeater. So each one you add to it, the stronger the connection becomes, because it will choose the best path between the nodes. And this one is so small that it's very easy to bring with you. So lately I've been keeping this one in my car, and this one is always living in my pocket. The other thing about the radio is get a ham radio, but make sure you can also program FRS and GMRS, because the harsh reality is getting your militia members to get ham radio certified is like pulling teeth. They are very resistant to it. Yes, sometimes they'll be inspired for a little bit, but it's going to be tricky to get everybody on board. And unfortunately, if not everybody is on board, not everybody can participate. I mean, unless you're not so worried about violating the ham rules. I'm not a stickler about it, but a lot of people are. And especially if you're using repeaters, they'll be a little bit more grumpy with you, because those are not your repeaters. They are, people have invested thousands of dollars into those repeaters. And if you're not licensed, they might be angry at you and come after you with some direction finding thing. And I don't know. People are like that. But if you're not licensed and you're just using simplex, this is my opinion. This isn't official. If you're not causing harmful interference with anybody, it's not going to be an issue. But watch the grumpy hams get all riled up in the comments. Just saying. But that's why your radio needs to be able to take GMRS and other types of channels, because it's much easier to get a GMRS license and much easier to fly under the radar if you don't have one. It's important to be able to include people in your drills. Now, if everything went down and there's no rule of law, or it's just a standard emergency and there is a rule of law, you are allowed to use ham bands in an emergency to protect life and property. It's explicitly allowed. But it's still best to get licensed. Just not everyone on your team is going to do it, unfortunately. So that's why I put that out there. Do you want to standardize using amateur radio for your team, or do you want to standardize something else like Mesh-tastic, using only texting, of course, or GMRS? All right, we're going to learn a handy acronym today, and that acronym is CRAPSHOOT. So this acronym is about learning how to actually communicate on the radio. And like most teaching acronyms, it's not necessarily meant for you to memorize and recall in the field, but it aids the teacher in explaining the concepts to you. For example, I remember learning in driver's ed when I was in high school, they had this acronym SIPD or something like that, which was scan, identify, predict, and then decide when you're driving. You're not always thinking about SIPD when you're driving. So, but it helps you to learn the processes that are going to become automatic. So let's learn what CRAPSHOOT means. Compose. Think about what you're going to transmit ahead of time. Rehearse it mentally if you have time, maybe even write it down, and make it as concise as possible and as clear as possible. And this will aid in actually, when you get to the transmit part, you're not just having a lot of like me. If I don't rehearse ahead of time, I'll have to clip out all the ums and uhs and splice it together so I'm not wasting your time. So practice your script. You know what I'm saying? I've got one right here. All right. Relax. Take a deep breath. listen to the channel for a little bit. Make sure you're not going to be talking over anybody. Just calm down. You don't want to be hurried or excited when you actually get to transmitting. Activate the push to talk button. Firmly get an audible click and then proceed to wait, not speak. That's what this P is for. Pause. Pause for half a second before you begin to speak. Because what a lot of people will do is just start talking right away, and then the first half second of their transmission will get cut off. So click, then speak. Speak is our S. Speak slowly, clearly, without contractions, without slang.
I was always kind of partial to Roy Rogers, actually. I really like those sequin shirts.
Do you really think you have a chance against us, Mr. Cowboy?
Yippee-ki-yay, mother...
You should always learn how to communicate clearly and concisely, but it's especially true when communicating on the radio, because you have the added problems of garbled transmissions, things getting cut off or lost in transmission, you know. So learn how to speak clearly, slowly, concisely, and so that you will be understood on a radio. Then the first part of your transmission is to hail the other person. I grew up watching all these NASA things, so they'll always say Atlantis, Houston, as a shorthand for Atlantis, this is Houston, blah, 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 blah. So hail the other person that you're trying to reach, then say, identify yourself. Then give your message. Then to conclude, you will have either the pro word over or out. Not over and out, over or out, because over means I'm turning it over to you and I expect you to respond to me. Out means I am shutting down this station and I don't want anything back from you. So it'd be kind of conflicting to say over and out, because like, please respond to me and shut up. No. Also, when I was teaching this to our little group before, our commander who was in the Army chimed in and said, also just a pro tip, if you're speaking to an officer or someone above you, don't use out. They don't tend to like that. So just taking his word for it. I've never been in the military, but then T is for traffic. And what this is indicating is after you've given your transmission, monitor the traffic. Wait for somebody to get back to you. See what's going on out there. So all of this is supposed to give you a good idea of how to communicate with a radio. Now we're going to talk about pro words, which does not mean professional words, but procedural words. And there's a whole bunch of radio shorthand that you need to get in the hang of using. And some of it you already know. You've heard over and out. You know, we've already talked about those two. This is, we already talked about that one. There's a bunch of procedural words that you already know, but you need to get in the habit of using, like affirmative rather than okay, because affirmative is clearer over the radio than okay. So let's go over a few of those real quick. The first thing to know is how to pronounce numbers and letters over the airwaves. Numbers actually have their own pronunciation, and you've probably heard them before, but just to put a fine point on it, here are the pronunciations and where you put the emphasis. 0, 1, 2, tree. Now, a lot of these are actually pronounced differently for a couple of reasons. Clarity over the radio, because things get garbled. So the TH sound and also V's, they don't transmit well over the airwaves. That sound kind of gets lost. So that's why 3 becomes tree, 4 kind of is now 2 syllables, fower. 5 becomes fife. Now these last two also help with disambiguation with the word fire. You can see where that would come in handy. Then there's 6, 7, 8, and 9er. And you don't say point when you have a decimal, you say decimal. And then numbers larger than 10, they're given 1 digit at a time. So 2158.9 becomes 2158 decimal 9er. The next thing to do is obviously memorize the NATO phonetic alphabet if you haven't already. This helps when talking on the radio, but it also helps you when you're talking to customer service and you have to give your email address and things like that. So I don't know how you remember the NATO phonetic alphabet, but I just spent way too many hours clipping quotes from movies to help you remember.
Alpha.
Bravo. Charlie.
Delta. Echo. Golf.
Hotel. India. Juliet.
Kilo. Lima. Mike.
Oscar.
Papa.
Quebec.
Romeo.
Sierra.
Tango.
Uniform. Victor.
X-ray. Zulu.
So let's translate some vernacular into radio speak here. So for example, say I have this message to give and I just say it like I might talk to a friend. Hey everybody, shut up. I'm about to do the mission. It really is me, Mr. Sierra. Now, that last part there, maybe he's trying to reassure them that it really is him because there might be some chance of people spoofing him on the radio. Maybe they've been hearing the bad guys try to mimic them. Well, there's a better way of doing that, and we'll learn about that soon. But here's the radio speak translation. All stations. This is Sierra 9er. Silence, silence, silence. Authentication, November Echo. Out. So this really clarifies some things. First of all, it uses the appropriate Prowords. It hails everybody with all stations. It identifies who is speaking. This is call sign Sierra 9er. And then, since the command is so important, it repeats it 3 times. Silence, silence, silence. And then it gives the authentication. Now everybody in the unit is going to have these dryad sheets that have a series of letters from A to Z, same number of rows as columns. And that allows them to use them like one-time pads, basically. If you give one letter, the authentication is the letter right below it, or maybe right to the left of it, or up and to the right. You have a certain pattern that you follow that you have set. And that's how you do your identification. There are a whole bunch of things that we can do with these dryad sheets, and that's going to be in the next video, because I don't have time to cover everything in one video. Now we are going to talk about the secs, the securities. So first we have TRANSEC, which is transmission security, and COMSEC, which is communication security. Let's talk about TRANSEC first. What is the difference between these two things? They sound kind of similar. They're both having to do with radios, but TRANSEC is specifically having to do with avoiding even being detected. So if I'm hanging out a long time on this radio, just rag chewing away, blah, 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 it gives the enemy a lot more time to detect your signal, to radio direction find you, pinpoint your location, and hit you with an artillery strike, or find you, whatever the situation may be. They also might jam you. So if they can prevent them from knowing what frequencies you're using, that helps protect TRANSEC. So some things that you can do, you can rotate your frequencies that you're using, keep your transmissions brief, use as little power as possible to get the transmission through to whoever you're trying to reach. And you can even change locations if operationally that works for you. You can use a repeater. So if your position is sensitive, but you have a repeater with a lot more power, maybe further behind you or farther away from you, then that can boost your range without compromising your specific position. There's a lot of things you can do like that. So, and if you're giving a standard report every hour on the hour, you might want to switch that up. So every on the half hour or every on the 35-minute mark, so that it makes it harder for people to predict when you're going to do your transmission. So that's what TRANSEC is about. And if it's compromised, it compromises your physical security because they can find you. And it compromises SIGSEC, signals security. COMSEC is a little different. COMSEC is referring to all of the encoded information that you are using when you are doing your transmissions. So code names, call signs, code words, all those types of things. And it's protected via encryption in modern military settings usually, but we don't have that option necessarily. Some of us whiz-bang tech nerds can do that. I don't even have that ability using my ham radios. In fact, if you use encryption or encoded messages on ham bands, the old hams will be quite cross with you because that's not allowed. But it might be something you want to consider anyway if you're really needing to keep COMSEC in mind. So if COMSEC is compromised, it will affect OPSEC, your operational security, because if the enemy has all your information, your code, call signs and code words, they can spoof you, they can figure out what you're doing just by listening in on your transmissions. So, very big topic, give you a high-level overview, and it's something that we as civilians should keep in mind. We don't have all the technical prowess of the U.S. military to solve COMSEC, but we have our brains, and we can come up with our own low-tech solutions to these things. And that can be good enough sometimes. Just to put a finer point on this, encryption is the backbone of the U.S. military's COMSEC procedures. In fact, military data links utilize state-of-the-art encryption modules, and they also, in addition to encryption, they have the ability to do frequency hopping that changes the frequency thousands of times per second. And we're not even talking about in one band. It'll be jumping all over the spectrum, which is really hard, if not impossible, to intercept and jam. Now, there's a lot we can do as sort of a poor man's COMSEC, and the whole trick is to come up with ways of communicating that the party you're trying to communicate to understands you and nobody else does. I'll link an interesting video from Gruntproof on the topic. He calls it Redneck COMSEC. And he makes some really good points in it. So rather than restate what he says, I'm just going to link the video and go watch it. And I don't want you to think that you can't do encryption as a private citizen. That's not the point. There are some radios, such as the TYT UV390 Plus, that can do some pretty solid encryption. The thing is, you'll have to get a business license if you want to operate legally. And that's not prohibitive, but it might be an extra cost that most people aren't prepared for. Today's action items basically get radios for your team, even if they're just FRS, walkie-talkie radios for now, so you can get some practice on them. And then you might want to upgrade in the future as you do some research of your own, figure out what works for you. In the next video, we're going to talk about signals operating instructions, which takes all of the information that you have to keep track of and compiles it in an organized fashion that everybody has access to on your team. We'll also be talking about standard reports such as salute reports, 9-line medevacs, sit reps, all that kind of stuff. So stay tuned for that, and thank you for watching. Hello, my puny-minded YouTube opponents. Let me show you my cat. La 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 la. He's my cat. She is going to defeat you.